Okay. In regards to the Uvalde shooting, it is obvious that poverty is one of the main factors that creates these shootings. Far more than any gun control argument can be made, it is poverty. And I have a war on poverty plan that is not being considered, it's not being presented to the public because they suppress my videos. So I urge you all to present it on your own, okay, and present it in your videos and subscribe to my channel, or at least emphasize this war on poverty plan. But first, I'd like to make it clear, okay, that my priority in life is not passing the war on poverty plan. That is not my priority, okay? I'm the top martial artist ever. My priority is to do God's will and not as the church is or as anyone else sees it, because no one else sees it the same way as me on this issue. I believe in a morally precise order from God where you tell the complete truth, not the psychology games and the theater games and the politics and the silly slave games that people are playing elsewhere. Okay, to be clear about that. So now, how do we prevent these shootings? How do we prevent crime in general? Look at the crime rates in Chicago and Baltimore and DC and Dallas and so on and so forth. There's high crime rates all over the nation, and it has to do with poverty, and it has to do with culture. It is a mix between white supremacy from the right and a laughable solutions that are being presented on the left. They're all wrong about how to solve the problem, so the problem doesn't get solved. Meeting halfway between the right and the left doesn't solve the problem. The right's suggestions don't solve the problem, and the left's suggestions do not solve the problem. Okay? And the libertarians and everyone else's. What we need clearly is a war on poverty plan to generate $200 billion. $200 billion a year in new tax revenue. But listen carefully, there's a lot more taxpayers than you might think. Okay? I consider around 200 million taxpayers. Or so. Okay? It's actually like 150 million taxpayers. Okay? And this is part of why I need the council to organize this, because they're fueling me and they're poisoning me. One thing's for sure, that we can raise $200 billion a year in new tax revenue without the money being significantly missed. Let's take the example of Seinfeld. Okay, Seinfeld is said to be worth $950 million. Did he earn that money fair and square? No. He gamed the system. Okay, if not everyone is being paid fairly for their labor, then people who are ridiculously rich, the rich in general and the people who are ridiculously rich didn't earn their money fair and square. And people are suffering because they don't want to admit that they didn't earn their money fair and square. And it's more than just what people cite as racism or discrimination in regards to gender or sexual orientation. It has to do with the bottom line thinking of the system itself. The crony capitalist kind of social club, kind of behind the scenes system that we have is an extreme outrage, and it goes far deeper than insider trading. And that's why those little kids died in Uvalde, Texas. That's why those little kids die in Compton, in Chicago, in New York, etc. In Atlanta, people get, kids die, and they die from gunfire, they die from preventable deaths, etc. Okay? And there are ways to reduce the population without people dying the horrible deaths that they're dying, such as changing the culture, birth control, tubes tied, what have you. Okay? So now let's look at my plan real briefly. Okay, some of you are like, wow, $200 billion. Look, I'm not a communist. This is nowhere near communism. Okay, nowhere near that. Okay, $200 billion a year comes with two parts of the plan. One is a $60 billion tax revenue plan, and the other is another $140 billion wealth tax plan. There are 22.5 or more millionaires and billionaires in this country, as the various news outlets report, and they're probably right about that. Okay, there's at least another 124 million or so taxpayers, okay, who pay taxes. So if we get the regular taxpayers who are worth less than $1 million, okay, have a net worth, right, of less than $1 million to pay, okay, an average, keyword average, I can't stress this enough, an average of $5 a month, okay? If you only pay like $30,000 in taxes, you're paying like $250 or $3 a month or whatever it breaks down to, okay? We can raise like $7.44 billion from that group alone, and we can raise the rest of the $60 billion from the people who make, who are worth $1 million or better, with an average of $200 a month. Okay, with a more progressive tax. So if you're worth like $1 million, you won't pay more than say $40 a month, because we'll do it a little bit more progressively than just the average, to make sure that there's not too much of a tax burden on someone with just $1 million or $1.1 million or what have you. Okay, so that's not that much money, especially when we consider what we get out of it. Okay, the second part of the tax plan, okay, is a $140 billion tax plan, where I ask, and this is assuming, okay, that there's about 4 million people of the 22.5 millionaires and billionaires that are worth $4 million or more. If there's only 3 million or so, we simply adjust it until we get the $140 billion number. So the 4 million people paying about $35,000 a year on average each will give us the under $140 billion. Okay, so we'll get to Seinfeld in a moment. We'll take the this is part of why I need a group helping me out, because they sabotage me severely, folks. I can't stress that enough. And if we break this video down into parts, and I have places to go where I'm not being fumed so much, and so easily by them, okay, then those videos will come out much more, much better, much more logical. No, I'm not going to compromise my view when I'm not prioritizing the War on Poverty plan. I prioritize my religion and doing God's work, especially when everybody is complicit with cheating me out of my rightful place. How many of you how many of you have seen me in the news? Okay, nobody, because they don't put me in the news, because the whole country's cheating me and nobody cares. Nobody cares what I've done. I've done more for America than anyone in American history. Okay? When we look at what someone actually has done, not leading someone into a trap that Martin Luther King himself said that he did. He fears he led his people into a burning house. Okay, everyone else is controlled opposition, leading people into a burning house. I give them the morally precise truth. Therefore, I've done more for America than anyone in American history, and I've done more for the human race than anyone in the human history and anyone who ever will. Okay, if you have any questions about that, please comment. Okay, so anyway, let's take the example of somebody worth about $4 million. Keep in mind that this person, okay, is on the bottom end of the wealth tax, right? It's $4 million or better. If they leave the country, we can still get their money, okay, because they owe this to this country as if they lived in it the rest of their life. So if you have $4 million and you leave the country, we say, hey, you owe us that much money. You owe us money for, say, 40 years. Okay, so anyway, considering the average lifespan or whatever, however long they're going to live. You get what I'm saying? Okay. So the person with $4 million, okay, is going to pay maybe $2,400 a year, from the War on Poverty plan, and another, say, $20,000 or so a year for the wealth tax. Okay. And that means that in a 40-year period, okay, he'll pay like $896,000. However, you got to consider investments. If this person puts just a couple million, say he gets 0.5% interest on $3 million in a savings account, okay, that should be somewhere around $600,000 if I did the math right. Again, they're fuming me and so on and so forth. So he can make almost all the money that he has to pay for the plan just in interest in the savings account. If he invests in real estate and he spends wisely, there's no reason he shouldn't be able to double his money or make back several million. So what the person will make with just the potential to make money with the money he has should be more than he has to pay to the plan. So he'll still be a millionaire, a multimillionaire, okay, while the poor will be helped out with $200 billion a year. Okay, now if we do it more progressively, we can make it so he only pays $15,000 a year and charge the super rich more. Okay, and then in that case, over 40 years, he only pays $696,000 or so, if I did the math right, instead of $896,000. You see how that works? There's nowhere near communism. It's nowhere near redistributing the wealth. The only reason the rich would reject it is if they're pure evil and they want a slave system. They want people suffering and dying, and there's no excuse. They should be locked up for rejecting. Well, look at the case of Seinfeld. Just throwing some numbers out here. He's worth $950 million or better, right? If you can, he can make, say the 0.5. He puts $300 million into a savings account with the 0.5% interest. Okay, he will get. See, it's 300 million, so he should get about 60 million back in 40 years. Is that what it is? Okay. This is 300 instead of 3. The guy with 3 million gets back 600,000 in 40 years, right? If I did the math right. And that guy should get back, and even if I'm wrong, you get the idea. They can make money with their money. So he should get, add 2 zeros, we get $60 million, okay? And that's just with 300 million of his 950 million, okay? Now, if we look at how much he'll pay in the plan, he might pay $4,000 a month in the War on Poverty plan, okay, which is $48,000 a year, okay? And he might pay around $200,000 a year for the wealth tax or more, okay? So we'll just call it $200,000 to throw a number out there. So he'll pay maybe $10 million in 40 years, okay? He can make $60 million in the savings account with just that $300 million in 40 years. But he'll only pay $10 million. That's why we got to tax him more progressively. But you get my point. This is nowhere near redistributing the wealth, folks. And every year we bring in $200 billion in tax revenue. Now, some of you just, are confused. What does this have to do with the shooting? The hell you think it has to do with the shooting? You think that person didn't see themselves as in a hopeless situation? You think that person was being encouraged to have a moral culture? You think he was in an environment where they encouraged him to do the right thing? In this country, folks, I don't know if you were born yesterday, but people encourage you to do the wrong thing. Corporate scum, gang members, teachers don't do enough to discuss morality, okay? Goths, rockers, name one culture, skaters, all the cultures that we have here, including the horrible hypocrites in the church, encourage people to do the wrong thing, okay, and make them feel hopeless. That's why it's called the Board of Education, because things are fucking boring. Part of the War on Poverty plan, the War on Poverty plan also fights inflation. The rich are going to take a hit anyway if they don't redistribute a certain amount of money because of inflation. The money sitting around creates inflation. And as the debt goes up in the government and they have to take more loans, that creates inflation as well, and printing more money, and you name it. Okay? So they're gonna take a hit anyway. Either way, they may as well redistribute the money. And they're not gonna miss the money. You know what I'm saying? If Seinfeld would be worth like fucking, $1.5 billion if he plays his cards right in 40 years, if he's still alive. Okay? He's not going to miss that $10 million in 40 years. It's outrageous that those people would pretend that this isn't what should be done. If anything, it should be a greater tax. Okay, notice they're confounding my speech. So I tell you people, are you going to let the fact that they're confounding my speech and suppressing my videos keep you from having the War on Poverty plan? My goodness. I'm in Morgan Hill, California, and I'm calling on every community and every religion and every sexual orientation to rally to me and let's insist on the War on Poverty plan, or you may as well be pulling the trigger yourself. I don't want to see any of you pretend like you're sad about anything that happens if you're not going to pass the War on Poverty plan because you're complicit as hell.